The altimeter unwinds like a broken clock. 4,000 feet, 3,500, 3,000. Lieutenant Robert Strobel's P-51 Mustang screams toward the French countryside at a 60-degree angle, nose pointed almost straight down at a German supply convoy crawling along the road below. His airspeed indicator climbs past 400 knots. The control stick vibrates in his hands. Every instructor who trained him said this dive angle would kill him. Every manual warned against it. Every pilot in his squadron thinks he's committing suicide right now, but Strobel isn't pulling up. Through his gun sight, he can see individual trucks getting larger by the second. He can see the canvas covers flapping in the wind. He can count the vehicles. His finger hovers over the trigger. In 18 seconds, he will either revolutionize ground attack warfare or become another casualty statistic in a war that's already claimed millions. The question is simple. Will physics prove him right, or will the Earth? Let me take you back to understand how a quiet farm kid from Ohio ended up defying everything the military told him was possible, and why what happened next would terrify German supply officers for the rest of the war. Northern France in the spring of 1944 is a landscape holding its breath. The hedgerow country stretches in endless green corridors, ancient field boundaries that will soon become killing grounds. Villages sit silent under German occupation, their church bells forbidden to ring. The roads carry a constant stream of Wehrmacht trucks, day and night, feeding supplies to the Atlantic Wall fortifications. Fuel, ammunition, replacement uniforms, medical supplies, everything the German war machine needs to keep fighting flows through these narrow arteries, and the Allies are desperate to cut them. Fighter-bombers hunt these convoys relentlessly. Republic P-47 Thunderbolts and Hawker Typhoons swoop down in shallow strafing runs, their wings rippling with muzzle flashes as 50-caliber machine guns tear into the columns. Sometimes they fire rockets that leave white contrails across the sky. But here's the brutal reality that's driving Allied commanders insane. It's not working. Think about the geometry for a moment. A fighter screaming in at a shallow angle, maybe 15 degrees, sees its target for perhaps 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, the pilot has to account for his own speed, the target's movement, wind deflection, and the fact that his bullets don't fly straight, they arc. Most rounds spray wide. A successful pass might destroy 1 truck, maybe 2 if the pilot's lucky. Then he has to pull away before he either flies into the ground or gets shredded by German anti-aircraft guns. The math is devastating. Allied intelligence estimates show that fighter-bombers are expending thousands of rounds of ammunition per vehicle destroyed. Pilots are dying at alarming rates. And despite all of this, despite the constant attacks, the convoys keep moving. Panzer divisions in Normandy keep receiving supplies. The German army keeps fighting. What would you do if you were tasked with solving an impossible problem, when everything you've been taught says there's only one way to do something, but that way clearly isn't working? Robert Strobel grew up in farm country outside Toledo, Ohio, where angles weren't abstract concepts. They were the difference between a good harvest and a failed one. His father operated a grain farm, and every autumn meant adjusting combine blades, calculating hopper trajectories, understanding how speed and descent angle affected yield. Young Robert learned to see geometry in everything: the fall of wheat, the pattern of dust, the way rain ran off barn roofs. He was 22 when he enlisted, slender and soft-spoken, the kind of young man who listened more than he talked and noticed details others overlooked. Flight school instructors were impressed by his smooth hands on the controls, his uncanny ability to judge distances without relying on instruments. He didn't muscle the aircraft through maneuvers like some pilots did. He felt it, guided it, understood it. By spring of 1944, he's assigned to the 361st Fighter Group, flying out of Bottisham in eastern England. He's piloting the P-51 Mustang, the sleek fighter that's revolutionizing the air war with its incredible range and speed. At high altitude, it can outrun anything the Luftwaffe throws at it. But down low in the weeds where ground attack happens, it's just another fighter trying not to become a fireball. Strobel flies the standard missions. Escort bombers deep into Germany. Strafe targets of opportunity on the way back. Don't fixate on ground targets. Don't press your attack. The pilots who press too hard end up flying into the ground at 300 miles per hour or taking a flak shell through the engine coolant system. If they're lucky, they glide to a belly landing in enemy territory and spend the rest of the war in a prison camp. If they're unlucky, well, the wreckage speaks for itself. But Strobel watches the gun camera footage during debriefs and something bothers him. He sees the tracers walking across fields, clipping fenders, shattering windshields. Trucks rarely explode. Convoys rarely stop. They just absorb the damage and keep rolling, and the next day another flight hits another convoy with the same disappointing results. There has to be a better way, doesn't there? The problem, he realizes, is dwell time. When you're screaming past a target at 300 knots, your guns are only on target for about 2 seconds. At shallow angles, your bullets arrive almost horizontally. They punch through thin canvas and wooden truck beds, but they rarely hit the critical components. The engine in front, the fuel tank in the middle, the ammunition in the cargo bed. Damage is superficial, annoying but not catastrophic. Some pilots try rockets, but rockets require you to fly straight and steady, which makes you a beautiful target for German gunners who have learned to track the contrails and fill the sky with flak. Hit rates are abysmal. Intelligence estimates maybe 1 in 12 rockets lands within 20 feet of the aim point. Others advocate skip bombing, bouncing small bombs off roads into convoys. It works against ships sometimes. Against trucks, it's a gamble that requires suicidally low approaches and perfect fuse timing. German flak crews love a predictable bombing run. Higher command basically accepts the inefficiency. Make up for it with volume. Send more sorties, expend more ammunition. The war's being won by industrial output anyway, right? Why risk pilots experimenting when standard tactics work well enough? But here's what keeps Strobel awake at night. Well enough isn't enough. Every truck that reaches the front line carries bullets that will kill Allied infantry. Every supply convoy that slips through means another week of fighting in the bocage, those murderous hedgerows where German defenders turn every field into a fortress. Another week until breakthrough. Another week of American and British boys dying. So Strobel starts sketching diagrams on the backs of navigation charts, and he keeps coming back to one radical idea. What if you came down steep, nearly vertical? Think about it. If you dive almost straight down, your guns fire directly into the top of the vehicle. Engines sit exposed in front. Fuel tanks sit vulnerable in the middle. Cargo sits completely unprotected. A steep dive gives you a nearly stationary target picture and maximum dwell time because you're not screaming past. You're descending in a controlled fall, adjusting your speed with throttle. But here's the problem. Actually, here are multiple problems. First, doctrine is crystal clear. Dives steeper than 45 degrees are for dive bombers like the Stuka, not for fighters. The Mustang isn't stressed for that kind of punishment, or so the manuals claim. Second, even if the airframe somehow holds together, the pilot would black out from G-forces during the pullout. 8, maybe 9 GS as you haul back on the stick to avoid auguring straight into the French countryside. Third, you might simply run out of altitude. From the moment you realize you're not going to recover to the moment of impact is measured in heartbeats. By every measure, by every calculation, by everything the military has taught him, this technique is suicide. But here's the question Strobel keeps asking himself. Has anyone actually tested it? May 17, 1944. The morning briefing covers the usual mission profile, escort bombers to Brunswick, then free hunting on the return leg. Strobel sits through it quietly, saying nothing. But afterward, over weak coffee in the dispersal hut, he mentions his idea to 2 wingmen. He shows them the sketches, explains the geometry. One pilot laughs outright. The other just shakes his head and walks away. The flight surgeon overhears the conversation. He pulls Strobel aside and tells him flatly that a 60-degree dive would put 8 GS on him during recovery. He'll gray out, probably lose consciousness. And even if he stays awake, the Mustang's elevator authority might not be enough to pull out in time. He'll hit the ground at terminal velocity and they'll need a shovel to recover his remains. Strobel asks a simple question. Has anyone actually tried it? Silence. No one has because no one's that reckless. Strobel doesn't argue. He just nods and walks out to his aircraft. The crew chief is finishing the pre-flight inspection, wiping oil from the engine cowling. Strobel asks him whether the airframe can handle a sustained 60-degree dive at combat power. The crew chief looks at him like he's asked whether the wings can be removed in flight. Structurally, maybe, but why the hell would anyone try? Strobel doesn't answer. He climbs into the cockpit and runs his checks with the same methodical calm he always does. Magnetos, trim tabs, fuel mixture, oxygen flow. The Merlin engine coughs, catches, settles into its smooth, powerful rumble. Around him, 11 other Mustangs are starting up, blue exhaust ghosting across the tarmac in the early morning light. He thinks about his father adjusting combine blades year after year, chasing the optimal angle until he got it right. Sometimes you have to test what everyone says is impossible, because sometimes everyone is wrong. The mission proceeds normally. The bomber stream hits its targets over Germany. Luftwaffe resistance is light. A few Messerschmitt 109s bounce the formation but disengage quickly. By early afternoon, the bombers are headed home and the fighters are released for ground attack. Strobel's flight drops down to 8,000 feet, scanning the French countryside for targets. The radio crackles with callouts, locomotives, barges, troop columns. Then someone spots it, a convoy, maybe 20 vehicles, strung along a road south of Rouen. No air cover visible. Minimal flak evident. The flight leader calls the attack, standard approach, single pass, shallow angle, don't press. Strobel acknowledges the call, but he has absolutely no intention of following it. He peels off early, climbing another 1,000 feet while the rest of his flight descends into their strafing run. From 9,500 feet, he can see the entire convoy laid out below him like toys on a carpet, trucks in tight intervals, a few command cars. One flak wagon near the rear, its quad-mounted 20mm guns scanning the horizon. Strobel takes a breath, rolls inverted, and pulls the nose down. 60 degrees, the world rotates. Sky becomes ground, ground becomes target. The airspeed indicator climbs. 300 knots, 350, 400. The Mustang's nose points at a supply truck near the front of the column like a rifle aimed at a paper target on a range. He adjusts the throttle, feeling the dive stabilize. No buffeting, no vibration, just smooth, controlled descent. The truck grows in his gun sight, larger, larger. He can see the canvas cover rippling, can see the driver's side mirror catching sunlight, can see individual tire treads. His altitude unwinds, 6,000 feet. 5,500, 5,000. What's going through his mind right now? Is he terrified, exhilarated, focused? We'll never fully know because Strobel was never one to romanticize these moments. But his hand is steady on the stick. His breathing is controlled. This is the moment. Everything comes down to the next few seconds. 4,000 feet. He opens fire. 650 caliber machine guns erupt. The recoil shudders through the entire airframe. Tracers pour downward in an almost vertical line, a stream of fire that looks nothing like the horizontal sprays from shallow strafing runs. He walks the rudder pedals gently, sliding the stream across the truck's length. Sparks explode from the hood. The canvas shreds. Then a flash, a bloom of orange flame, and the truck disintegrates as its fuel or ammunition cooks off. Here's what separates Strobel from every other pilot in that sky. He doesn't pull up. He pushes the nose forward slightly and tracks to the second vehicle. The dive angle holds. Airspeed bleeds off just enough to keep him subsonic. He fires again. Another truck explodes, then a third. His tracers are hitting dead center every single time because the target isn't moving relative to his gun sight. It's like shooting at a photograph, like shooting at a stationary target on a firing range. Every bullet finds its mark because the geometry is perfect. 3,000 feet, still diving, fourth truck, fifth, sixth. Explosions ripple down the convoy in sequence, each one triggering the next like a chain of firecrackers. The flak wagon frantically swings its guns skyward, but the crew has a problem. Their guns can't depress far enough to track something coming almost straight down from above. Strobel's bullets tear through its thin armor and it erupts in a spray of white-hot fragments. 7, 8, 9. The convoy is a chain of fireballs now. Trucks slam into the wreckage ahead as drivers panic or die at their wheels. Black smoke towers into the afternoon sky. The road is completely blocked. Nothing's getting past this inferno. 11, 12, altitude 1,800 feet. Now comes the moment of truth. The moment when physics and human physiology and aircraft engineering either work together or fail catastrophically. Strobel eases back on the stick. The G-forces crush him into his seat like a giant hand pressing down on his chest. Gray fog creeps in at the edges of his vision, narrowing his world to a tunnel. His arms feel like they're made of lead. Every breath is a struggle. The Mustang groans, its airframe stressed to the limits. Metal creaks, rivets strain, but the nose comes up. The horizon rotates back into view. The dive transitions to level flight. He bottoms out at 900 feet, still flying, still conscious, every system functioning normally. Behind him, 12 trucks burn, 12 vehicles completely destroyed. The road blocked, supplies stopped. German logistics officers are going to be screaming into telephones in about an hour, trying to explain what the hell just happened. His wingmen are shouting over the radio, frantic, asking if he's alive, asking what the hell they just witnessed. Strobel keys the microphone. His voice is calm, almost casual, like he's commenting on the weather. "I'm fine," climbing back to rejoin. That evening in a briefing room that smells of cigarette smoke and stale coffee, the squadron intelligence officer threads the gun camera film into the projector. The room goes silent as the footage plays. The steep dive, the precision, the methodical destruction, 12 vehicles in a single pass, no rockets, no bombs, just gravity, geometry, and machine guns firing into the heart of each target. The intelligence officer rewinds it and plays it again, then a third time. Finally, he looks at Strobel and asks the question everyone's thinking. "How the hell did you survive the pullout?" Strobel shrugs. kept the speed below redline, trusted the airframe. Would you do it again? Don't see why not. Someone in the back of the room mutters that it's still suicide, but the gun camera doesn't lie. 12 trucks, 1 pass, 0 damage to the Mustang. The math has just changed. Within a week, 3 other pilots in the 361st try the technique. 2 succeed spectacularly. 1 pushes too hard, pulls too late, and bends his airframe on recovery. He lands safely, but the Mustang is written off, its fuselage buckled behind the cockpit from excessive G-forces. The lesson becomes clear. The maneuver works, but only within narrow parameters. You need altitude discipline, speed discipline, G-tolerance awareness. You need to be the kind of pilot who can hold a dive angle without fixating, who can judge pull-out altitude by feel rather than instruments. Flight leaders begin teaching it selectively, not to everyone, not to the aggressive pilots who already press too hard and who might push beyond the edge, but to the smooth ones, the calculators, the ones who understand that precision beats aggression every single time. By June, after the Normandy invasion begins, the technique spreads across other fighter groups. Thunderbolts and Mustangs begin hitting convoys with devastating efficiency. A single flight of 4 aircraft can destroy an entire logistics column in minutes. German supply officers respond by moving convoys only at night, then only in small packets, then, when possible, not at all. Rail traffic increases to compensate, which means rail yards become target-rich environments. Which means the Germans face an impossible choice: move supplies by road and lose them to dive attacks, or move them by rail and lose them to strategic bombing. The logistical stranglehold tightens like a noose. The 9th Air Force compiles data through the summer. Convoy destruction rates triple. Ammunition expenditure per vehicle killed drops by 40%. And here's the stunning part. Pilot losses on ground attack missions actually fall because time over target decreases dramatically and flak crews simply can't track the near-vertical dives effectively. No formal doctrine is ever written. No training manual is ever updated. It remains a technique passed from pilot to pilot, flight to flight, learned through demonstration and practice. But its effects ripple across the entire theater of operations. In August, Allied intelligence interrogates a captured German quartermaster. He reports that supply shortages are crippling front-line units more than direct combat losses. Trucks aren't reaching their destinations. Fuel isn't arriving. Entire divisions are immobilized not by enemy tanks but by empty fuel cans. Strobel flies 68 more combat missions. He refines the technique, experiments with different dive angles for different targets. Trains require shallower approaches because they're moving. Barges need lead calculation, but trucks stationary or slow moving on roads are always the same. Steep, controlled, lethal. He never promotes the method, never claims credit. In debriefings, he describes it clinically as though he's explaining crop rotation, just angles and timing, just physics. Other pilots start calling it the Strobel dive. He shrugs off the name. It's not his. It's just geometry that everyone had been too cautious to try. Here's what I find fascinating. In a war filled with dramatic personalities and larger-than-life heroes, Strobel remains almost invisible. He's not giving speeches, not posing for propaganda photos, not writing memoirs. He's just a quiet Midwestern kid doing a job that needs doing with the same patient logic his father applied to farming. The war ends. Strobel comes home to Ohio. And here's the remarkable part. He never flies again, not once. He goes back to farming, takes over his father's operation, spends the next 40 years optimizing yields and teaching his sons the same patient geometry that had once turned a fighter plane into a precision instrument of warfare. He rarely speaks about the war. When pressed, he mentions the missions in passing, the way someone might mention a previous job. No drama, no embellishment, just a thing he'd done when it needed doing. In 1983, a military aviation historian tracks him down. The historian wants to interview him about the dive technique that reshaped ground attack doctrine without ever being formally recognized. Strobel agrees, but only briefly. He explains the mechanics the same way he did in 1944. Angle, speed, altitude. The historian asks if he'd been afraid during that first dive. Strobel thinks for a moment. Then he says fear wasn't the right word. Uncertainty, maybe. But uncertainty is just a gap in knowledge. You test, you learn, you adjust. The historian presses, but you risked your life. Strobel's response is pure Midwest pragmatism. Everyone in that war risked their life. I just tried to make sure mine counted for something. He dies in 1991 at the age of 69. His obituary mentions that he was a farmer, a father, a veteran. It doesn't mention the 12 trucks. Doesn't mention the convoys stopped or the infantry lives saved by ammunition that never arrived. He's remembered by his community as a good farmer, a patient teacher, a man who believed problems had solutions if you looked at them from the right angle. But here's the legacy that endures. In the cockpits of attack aircraft for generations afterward, the principle lives on. When doctrine fails, test. When everyone says it's impossible, check the math yourself. When survival and mission success seem opposed, sometimes they're the same thing seen from different altitudes. Strobel didn't change warfare through traditional heroism or brilliant tactical genius in the cinematic sense. He changed it by refusing to accept inefficiency when better geometry existed, by trusting an airframe more than the institutional fear surrounding it, by understanding that the most dangerous path is sometimes the one no one's had the courage to walk. 12 trucks in 18 seconds. Not because he was reckless, but because he was patient enough to see what panic and doctrine had obscured. Because he understood that courage isn't the absence of danger, it's the presence of logic when everyone else has stopped thinking. The Mustang could handle the dive. The pilot could handle the G-forces. The enemy couldn't handle the geometry. And for a few crucial months in 1944, that equation rewrote the mathematics of ground attack over occupied Europe. 160-degree dive at a time. One convoy at a time. One quiet farm kid from Ohio proving that sometimes the impossible is just the untested. What problems are you accepting as unsolvable simply because everyone says they can't be solved? What conventional wisdom are you following without questioning whether there might be a better angle? Those are the questions Robert Strobel's story asks us to consider. Not just about warfare, but about every challenge we face. Sometimes breakthrough doesn't require more resources or more people or more time. Sometimes it just requires someone willing to look at the problem from a different altitude and ask, has anyone actually tested whether this is impossible? Or are we all just repeating what we've been told?